afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our second town hall on the census and the importance of completing that form. Before we get further, I would just like to read a little bit of a poem to honor Congressman John Robert Lewis. 2 hands upon thy breast, and labor is done. 2 pale feet crossed in rest. The race is won, and that's by Mullock. Thank you, Congressman, for all that you've done for this world. Now, for the South Metro Democratic Women's Council, we have a 4-part mission. The first one is to engage women of South Metro in a wide variety of political activities, to provide members with substantive information regarding local issues, and to provide education, and to provide voter registration activities within the community. This group was formed in September of 2014. And we have members throughout the South Fulton area. Kathy, it's your time.
Good evening, Gloria, and thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. This is part 2 of a 3-part series. If you didn't make it on the first one, part 1 was Don't Cheat Yourself. Tonight's session is Don't Cheat Your Community. That's part 2. And part 3 is coming up in September. It is Keep the Community in the Forefront. And that's to be hosted on September 22nd. My name is Kathy Adams, and I am the immediate past state president of Georgia Federation of Democratic Women. And I'll serve as your moderator for this evening. But before we get started, I got a few housekeeping rules. Just a couple. All lines have been muted, so unless you're speaking, please make sure that your line is muted, and that helps us to eliminate the background noise. We want to make sure that everyone that wants to be attentive can hear the messaging that comes across. And then secondly, should you have any questions or comments, please share those with us using the chat feature, and we'll address those as we go along. The purpose of this evening's meeting is to show the importance and to share some information and facts with you about this 10-year phenomenon called the census. The residents of the southern portion of Fulton County, this 76-mile-long county, continue to remain undercounted. We don't know why, but we certainly hope that the information that we share with you this evening will help us to dispel any rumors that are out there. And it will provide you with some information and to help you remove any fears, doubts, or challenges that you may have in preventing, well, that will prevent you from completing the census. But before I go any further, I want to introduce you to a distinguished guest, some distinguished guests that I have serving on the panel this evening, and they are going to share some information with you about the census, how it impacts us, and the importance of the census. First, I'd like to start with Christopher Pike. He is with the City of South Fulton, and he's an Economic Development Director. Chris, would you raise your hand? Okay. And next, I have Alex Lima. He is a Census Partnership Specialist. Alex, will you raise your hand? And we will have us joining shortly. We will have the former Fulton County Sheriff, Jackie Baird Washington, and then also Fulton County School Board member, Linda Bryant. Without further ado, I'd like to go ahead and get started with a few questions and pose them to our distinguished guests on the panel, and have them to chime in and give us some information. But I also want to let you know that we have a hotline set up this evening. So if there's anyone out there who is seeking assistance with completing the census form. Perhaps you have some questions. I want you to dial this number, and the hotline is open until 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time tonight. That telephone number is 1-833-637-6392. And you can reach a team of volunteers that we have there. They will help walk you through the census, because there are 3 simple ways that you can complete the census. It's not too late. We'll share that with you later on. If you're not prepared to complete the census using the hotline tonight, we'll give you another dial-in 800 number to complete the census and some additional information. So without further ado, let me just go ahead and get started. And to Chris and my panel, you know, there are a lot of people, many people have concerns and fears about the census. And they often ask the question, you know, will this impact my citizenship? Does the census ask questions about censorship? And, you know, could you share with us, Alex and Chris, you know, whomever, some information about this? Is this true? Is it not true? What are there, should there be concerns around citizenship?
I'm gonna let Alex kick that one off.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for inviting myself to be present to share with you the value and the importance of completing your decennial census. It's a once-in-a-decade opportunity to truly shape our future. And it's behind me. It says shape your future, but I like to say shape our future, because I reside here south in Fulton South, and so it's our future. The census essentially takes a snapshot of everybody living in the country, regardless of their status. Based on the count is how more than $675 billion is sent out to communities for schools, road repair, firehouses, police stations, medical programs, programs that affect our communities, that benefit our communities. Economic development is also affected by census data. And so that should not deter anybody from jumping on 844-330-2020 and calling in and filling out their census, or going to my2020census.gov, and you will see what you see in the background once you go there and filling out the census. It's so simple. There's 9 questions. It's nothing intrusive. There's people share more information on their social media accounts than what the census is going to ask you. What's your name? How old are you? Do you rent? Do you own? Again, questions that are that simple. If you do have additional people in your home, it is going to ask you those same questions for that additional person. So yeah, filling out your census is something that you will want to do regardless of your status, because based on that number is, again, how we will get resources for our communities.
So I would like to make it a little more current as far as current events. So if we think about COVID-19 or coronavirus, and so there's been a lot of aid that's come down from the federal government to help with fighting COVID-19 in communities. And so if you think about those resources and how they're allocated specifically on population numbers. And I'll give you an example. So technically, for them to get direct aid from the federal government, you had to have 500,000 people or more. Well, technically, based on the census data, city of Atlanta was 900,000 people, but they allowed the city of Atlanta to use their 2019 estimate numbers, which put them over that 500,000. So the city of Atlanta was able to get an allotment of federal funding from the federal government for COVID-19 relief based on their population number. And so that information is directly related to the last census that happened. And so that's just one example of how allocations and everything that anytime the federal government sends down money, it's always going to be based on some type of population formula that they derive directly from data that they get from the census. And so it's so vitally important when you think about just simple things about life and death, that data is really important to help formulate how that relief comes down.
million dollar question, and I just want to know, how do we encourage our Spanish speaking families to complete the census? I know it's a challenge. It always has been a challenge, but do you have any thoughts around that?
So, I'm a first generation born in this country citizen, I guess. My mother came here from Guatemala. Es muy importante que llenen el censo porque es el dinero que va para su comunidad y sus hijos. So what I said is it's very important that you fill out the census because it goes to your community, but it helps out your children. I think there's a disconnect and there's not a clear understanding of how the census works. Essentially, people leave their country for a better opportunity. That's why my mother left her country. And so she came here because here there's schooling, there's roads, there's cities, there's jobs. Well, what folks don't understand is when they come here and they don't identify themselves here, suddenly classrooms become overcrowded because a good portion of those children are not represented in the census data. So what they've tried to leave almost happens again where they are. So it's outreach, and it's letting them know that you are okay, that you are protected. And again, we do not share this information with anybody. We do not share it with law enforcement. We do not share it with your landlord. We do not share it with the people who you have to pay your utility bills to. This information is kept confidential and only is reported in a big number to, again, allocate the resources. So the key is more outreach and more education to let them know that it's okay, it's safe. One thing that we did position in some cities that have a larger Latino population is this is pre-COVID, of course, is to have safe haven areas to report, because there was a misnomer and a misunderstanding that if I filled this out right now, you were going to know where I am. And so if I'm not here as a documented citizen and I fill this out, you're going to come get me. But that's not the case. That's not true. So the outreach, which we're still doing, and we're doing again through social media, but also we have to do through word of mouth. I think that we have to step out of our realm of comfort. And if we don't speak a whole lot of Spanish, but we know there's a Spanish speaking family in our neighborhood or on our block, is approach them and ask them, have you filled out your census? Butcher the Spanish and let them butcher the English and try to come to this understanding on why it's important, because that's how we're going to reach them, because they may not be on social media.
Well, let me shift the table a little bit. Let me pivot, because that is not, the Spanish speaking population is not the only gap that we have. We have a large gap with our African American males. They are the most undercounted population of the census, and we're trying to understand why as well. And do you have any thoughts or perspective on that, Chris or Alex?
Well, I would say that a lot of that is systemic. I mean, there's always been a distrust, if you will, especially in the African American community as it relates to government and their role in any number of things. I mean, obviously we all know the history. And so I think there's a disconnect because there is that distrust, to the same reason that you have other non-English speaking groups. They have that same distrust. And so it's nothing unique from, to folks that may be here and aren't documented, and they're concerned with that. It's the same principle, is that you have a distrust of the government or what's going to happen to you if you send this information. And I think what we have to do is just demonstrate that that's not necessarily the case. And we keep hammering in this same message that we don't report this information for the purposes of being able to track down people who have outstanding warrants and that type stuff. And I think that's really a lot of what we're seeing, is people are connecting that to you knowing where I am. But the reality is your cell phone does more damage for identifying where you are than your census information ever will. And so I think that's what people need to understand, is that if the government wants to know where you are, they can definitely do it. They don't need the census to do that.
Absolutely. So, Alex, do you want to chime in on that?
So in East Point and College Park, we've done a couple town halls that have been non-traditional, if you will. When COVID first hit, it was very tough for those who have hair to maintain what they had going on their crown. And so what we did is we put together a virtual barbershop. And in this virtual barbershop, there's shop talk. When you're in a barbershop, there are things that are said, and they're not said in with any kind of. Oh, sorry, I thought I heard some background noise. They're just said truthfully, and so we had this town hall. We connected with organizations, Black Dads Count, who also have been doing outreach to barbershops. We recently did in College Park a town hall called What's the Tea on the 2020 census. Again, we're trying to figure out unconventional ways to communicate the information so that people understand. Prior to my working for the census, my wife did not know the value and importance of the census, and she's in her 30s. Mm-hmm. And that's a problem, right? And so because we're not given this information, because it's not part of our conversation during dinner, it's not something that we grew up with. So the key is the outreach and the education, but also the understanding. I think that I've done enough of these presentations that sometimes I feel like the information I give just goes over people's heads, because the second I give numbers and start rambling, it's not attainable. But if I start talking about, pizza, everybody understands pizza. And if I say, well, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, there's 10 of us here in this Zoom meeting right now, and your favorite pizza joint says, I have pizza for everybody on this Zoom call. How many people do you have? And we say, we've only got 4 people. So they make 4 pies. 4 pies show up, and now we have to split 4 pies amongst our 10 households. When I break it down like that, they go, wait a minute, I want my own pie. I want my own pizza for my family. And so it's rebranding or repurposing the message so that it's received and understood on how this benefits not just my household, my community, but us as a whole.
Well, one of the challenges we're having is reaching a targeted audience. Right now, South County, I mentioned that earlier in the opening, we seem to have a disconnect and are at wit's end on trying to come up with strategic methods on how we reach South County, in particular, some of those communities that are struggling, and they are flooded with people of color. Hispanic populations are heavy in those areas, and they're just not participating, and I'm going to shift that, because the other side of that is we start looking at our school system. What does the census do for our school system? For those children, for the parents who are not participating, those children still have to go to school. We still have Title I schools. We have overcrowded classrooms. What can the census do? Chris, have you seen any of those impacts? I mean, how do we tie the two together? We're looking at South County, but we're still talking about a need that hits every day. We're talking about the infrastructure of a school system, but we're also talking about programming of a school system, but we have parents who don't seem to think it's important enough to participate. Can you shed a little bit of light on that?
Sure. I just think it's a disconnect of people understanding how the government really impacts their day-to-day lives. And so let's not be naive. If you're struggling to put food on the table, you're not really concerned with all the other things that make up a community. You're just basically trying to understand, how am I going to get through and survive this day? And so you don't really think about the larger picture of what's going on in your life. And so you think about the roads that get paved. When I was an elected official, I used to go and talk to school groups, and we had a full service city, and I would tell the kids, I said, if you think about it, everything that you do is impacted by government, and specifically local government. And so when you turn your light on in the morning, that light switch, that power that comes on, in the case where I was, we were electric city, the city made that happen. When you get out and you go and you stand at the bus stop and you get on that school bus and you go to school, the local government makes that happen. whenever you go to the grocery store. The fact that you even have a grocery store in your community, the government plays a part in making that happen. And all of those resources that happen, like teachers in the classroom, how many teachers you have in the classroom, how many students to teacher ratio you have, whether you get your street paved or not. In some respect, all of those things are related to population and understanding the demographic of people in that community. And so when you think about even how we allocate programs for low impoverished communities, if we can't get a grasp on how vast that demographic is, or how vast that group of people that need that assistance is, we can't provide the adequate resources to help that. I will tell you, in the city of South Fulton, we're getting ready to submit a CDBG application to become a city that will get the direct allocations from the federal government. That information that we put in there is all based on information that we've gotten from census data, from the last census that was done. And so we have to make sure that we're impacting our community based on that information. And I think that's what people need to understand is, if you are the least of these, you're the ones that need to be counted the most, because you're the one that's going to benefit the most from the assistance that's going to come down. And so I think that, it's a missed opportunity for us not to get that message out. But again, I think the problem that we're having is, some of those folks are so disconnected on how government works as a whole. And it needs to be an education thing that happens all year, every year, not just when we're trying to do the census.
Absolutely.
The problem when we do it leading up to the census is people feel like you're just shoving it down their throats because you want them to fill out some paperwork. But we need to educate folks every day on how they're impacted and how they can really help themselves by taking some leadership in that.
So it's an ongoing effort, and it's a missed opportunity for the policymakers, but it's not a missed opportunity. It's a missed opportunity for those who don't participate, because then you get fewer services. But the downside is you got to wait 10 more years to make up for the lost traction. So, but let me just share with our guests again. I want to remind everyone that we still have our hotline open this evening. So if you're listening in and you're having got a question about the census, completing the form, you're having some challenges, we got a team set up until 7:30 Eastern time this evening. Dial 1-833-637-6392, and that team people are there they're manning the phone. They're there to help you, with the census form. So, but there are a number of different methods to complete a census form. So it's the deadline or anything like that. But just know that we will, you still have an opportunity to complete it. You can complete it online. You don't have a computer at home, you can go to a local library and complete it. Alex can share with you that website address, and there's an 800 number you can call after tonight and answer the 9 questions and complete the census. Or if you found your form, you've misplaced it, you found it, you want to mail it in, you can still do that. So there's not it's not the end of the world, and we want you to get engaged. We want you to be involved. We want you to be counted, and make sure that you get the goods and services that are deserving of you, for you and your family. So, I want to talk a little bit about college students. How do we count our college students? We have some that are home because of COVID that are not going back to college campuses. We have some that have just graduated. We have children who are not living at the same address all the time, and maybe they're, in a co-parenting situation. How do we deal with those situations? Because it's real. So we can't pretend like it doesn't exist. Can, one of you or someone chime in and tell us how the residents and, the citizens should deal with a situation like that?
So students are encouraged to count themselves where they're attending school. So let's say you are at Morehouse, but you're originally from Detroit, Michigan. You would not count yourself in Detroit. Your parents would not count you. You would count yourself here in Atlanta. There's also a group quarters enumeration process where we send out enumerators to areas where there are large populations to try to capture the masses. In terms of the split household situation, you know, key communication between the parents is optimal. I would say, hopefully it's optimal for the child's sake, that they decide where the child spends most of the time and determine it that way. Hopefully, you know, you're still in the same county, in the same city, and so you're still able to get counted. So there are mechanisms in place, and I actually do want to lead into the enumeration process. It's what's going to be coming next in terms of an operation. So for those of you who have not filled out your census form, either through the phone, 1-844-330-2020, or online, my2020census.gov, maybe you received a paper application or form to fill out to mail in. We just sent out reminder postcards this last week. So maybe you misplaced it, maybe you didn't. For those of you who had not responded yet, we sent a reminder. Currently, we're in the process of training people, the enumerators, to go out into the communities in about 2 weeks. So I'll say about the second week of August, you're going to start to see census employees out there, enumerators lovingly known as door knockers. They will be full PPE'd out, gloves, mask, hand sanitizer, and they will be conducting the next phase of the operation, which is attempting to get a response from the people who have not responded yet. So there are things in place to be able to go ahead and ensure that we try to get the most accurate count possible.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds good, because, you know, that was one of my questions. You know, I know traditionally that's the way they used to do it in the past. They would come knock on your door and then, you know, ask for information. They'd have census takers there. So that's good. I'm glad you brought that up. So, you know, we've had our former sheriff, Jackie Barrett Washington, to join us as well. So she is a part of our distinguished panel. And Sheriff, we're glad to have you this evening. One of the other questions, a question has come up in the chat box, and it's Mr. Pike, and perhaps you can chime in on this one. It's like, how do businesses use census, and, you know, and its impact on the community, like on grocery stores and commercial and retail? What do they get from the census data? How do they use that?
Well, that's a great question, because the reality is just about everything that's in your community is derived from census data. So to give you an example, when a company is looking to come to a location, like for example, to where I work, South Fulton, they will send me an information sheet that has some very specific things that they need to have to make a determination whether or not they're going to come to your community. And a lot of that has to do with population. So they want to know how many people. It's usually, it's either you get the request in drive time or you get it in miles. So I want a 1 mile radius from this address, a 3 mile radius, a 5 mile radius, or sometimes it's 137. It just depends. And then you also get it in a drive time. So I want a 15-minute drive time or 30-minute drive time. And basically they want to know a pinpoint on a map how many people live within those different radius from that location. So we use software, economic development software, either like Esri or CoStar. All of those are economic development tools that we use to determine different key indicators about demographic. All of that information comes from the census. So even though they're not saying, it doesn't say, oh, we got this information from census, Esri, they get their data from the census, and then they get the updates every year, and they upload that information into that database. And so whenever we have somebody, like, for example, we're building a Publix in South Fulton, we have to send Publix corporate that information, which is based on census data. And so when you have food deserts, the way to resolve that is to be able to recruit a grocery store, but the grocery store is going to want to know that demographic information, which is derived from the census. And so it's vitally important that we have accurate data so that we can be able to convey an image to those businesses that we're trying to get to come to our community. And it's like that everywhere. It's not something that's unique to South Fulton. It's not something that's unique to Georgia. It's used, that same methodology is used all over this country. And so if other communities have more complete data and we're competing with them, but our data is not as complete as another community, we're going to lose out the opportunities because those communities have better information, or their demographics are better, or the information is more complete. And so they're able to make a better argument for why you should come to our community as opposed to going to a community that's south of I-20. And so that's something that I think people really need to understand, is why the government collects the census data. All these for-profit software companies, they just use that same data and upload it into their platform. So it's the same information that we use from an economic development and recruitment standpoint.
Okay, well, awesome, awesome. So, but let me shift the tables a little bit, because I'm going to talk about our incarcerated population. And Sheriff Baird Washington, perhaps you can chime in on this a little bit. You know, how do we account for those individuals that are incarcerated? And Alex, and maybe you can kind of help with that, but I want to ask the sheriff, what have you seen in the past, or do you know of that? What are we doing to make sure that they are accounted for? And do we count them in that institution, or do we count them where they used to reside? How does that work? And who does the counting for those that are incarcerated? Sheriff, you're on mute. Hold on, you got to unmute yourself.
There you go. Yeah, I'm just talking and nobody's listening. And Alex may be able to correct me if I say this incorrectly, but as I recall, we filled it out for our population, in terms of who was there, and then by all the other demographic information that they would ask on a certain day. So it was a snapshot of the population on a given day. So I would imagine that's how most correctional institutions are doing it, whether it's local jails or state prisons or federal prisons, that everybody's doing it the same way. But I also want to go back to something that Mr. Pike said, which is when you're talking about, where to place things like grocery stores, there is a definite correlation to be made with not having enough fresh fruits and vegetables, fresh food, quality food, and the diet, especially of children, and the criminality rate. Because one of the things that we do know is when the brain is not being fed nutrients appropriately, the child does not develop well. And when the child does not develop well, the child does not learn well. And when the child does not learn well, we can see a trajectory towards criminality. So it is vitally important that we make certain that our communities get the kinds of things that we need to have. We've been talking about the fact that a child's zip code should not determine their destiny, and it shouldn't, but that's a matter of equality. And so if we want the kinds of things that will sustain our young people into quality adulthood, it is important that we are counted, and that we make sure that the people who are making business decisions about moving into South Fulton or anywhere else know what this population looks like, what kind of spending money, expendable dollars we have, so that we don't end up with Barnes and Noble moving and yet another hair place moving in. I mean, we just, enough is enough. And so having said that, Mr. Pike, we sure could use a fresh market. That would be so nice on our side of town. I get no stock from Fresh Market, but I'm just saying, it does not make sense that we have to drive north of I-20 to find that kind and that quality, or even down to Highway 78 to find a Kroger that has a fresh market, fresh bar. So these things are important to us, and I see it in the continuum of care for our young people, so that we can in fact cut back on criminality. All of this is so interconnected.
Absolutely. So Alex, and want to get into that because we talk about income levels and the influence of income levels, and because I see some connection there. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how that plays into the census?
So census data, it is shown that the people who participate tend to have a greater income level because they have a higher education. And so they understand the importance of participating in the census. Through the census data, you get things like Pell Grants that most people aren't aware. I know you touched base on the college students and kind of going back a little bit, but census data is key for Pell Grants. So people who are looking to go to college, who are looking to further their education, that census data is key. In terms of, again, income, jobs also, not jobs specifically in terms of because of the count, there's more jobs there, but industry looks at census data to see where they can set up more businesses. And I'm sure that Chris can speak to that in greater detail. But census data is the key. I use a reference. I come from an era, there was a group called Wu-Tang Clan, and they had a song called Cream. Cash rules everything around me. And I say, no, dream, data rules everything around me. I don't think we fully understand the ramifications of not showing up on paper. So when we don't show up on paper, these organizations, these companies, the people who are making big decisions, they don't see us. And if they don't see us, then those dollars, those developments, they just aren't coming our way. So it's just vitally important to go back to something that Jackie said. There's a correlation between everything. And I don't know that we are taking the time to watch it all and how it's all playing together between food deserts, between business development, between Pell Grants, between jobs, between overcrowded classrooms. These are all things that our communities have seen historically and have seen it in high numbers where the numbers are low. So there's the correlation there. High number of these things that are missing and low number of being counted on the census. So it's just so vitally important. And I know that time's going to go really quickly. I'm going to encourage people, reach into your phone and contact 5 people in your phone. Ask them if they completed the census, and then ask them to ask 5 people, because maybe not everybody's on social media. Maybe not everybody is on Instagram. Maybe not everybody is listening to the radio, but you reaching out to them may remind them how important it is to fill out the census and participate.
Now, we've got a couple of questions, and I want to hit these really quickly. One was around hurricanes and natural disasters and those types of things. How does the census play into the goods and services received from the government? Is there some connectivity there? Like with FEMA's numbers and things like that, does the census play a role in that?
So I will connect that back to the example I gave about the city of Atlanta getting a direct allocation for COVID relief. So if you think about COVID, that's no different than if a hurricane or some other natural disaster were to come through a community. The federal government, they're going to allocate resources for the most part based on population. So obviously, if there are more people impacted in one geographical area as opposed to another, they're going to put more resources and more funding based on that population. And so I think it's vitally important to understand that information, it's basically a formula. There's nothing that they don't look and say, oh, well, we really like this community more than another. It's really just based on population, and it's part of a formula, and then it spits out a dollar amount, and that's how that money gets allocated. And I wanted to piggyback again on something Alex said about the data, especially around economic development, because it's the same way. When you look at those businesses or those companies that are making decisions to come to a community, it's not like it used to be 30, 40 years ago where they would fly in, you would put them in a car, you'd give them a tour of your community, you'd show them the good stuff that you had in your community, and did a sales pitch, and those relationships really sold the community. All of that stuff's data driven now. So they take you off the list based on a certain set of data that they just Google or they get from Census or they get from ESRI. And all of that information is going to be based off that data that has been populated from the census. So a lot of times we don't even know somebody's considering our community because they never call us or reach out to us because they've already made a decision based on the data that they have, whether or not they're going to further the investigation to actually select a community.
You know, we had someone too in the chat. They want to know a little bit more about schools and how it ties into census data. I think we touched on that lightly, but is there anything additional, any additional information we want to talk about? Maybe it's about the brick and mortar side of, you know, where we build schools, how, you know, the size of the school, the Title I schools, whatever. Anybody want to chime in on that a little bit more?
I'll say this. So there are free and reduced lunch programs that our communities are involved in. Census data is key in ensuring that those programs are funded properly. I think that, again, because we don't see the correlation, we don't see the very quick connection, we miss the notion of the value of participating in the census. So it's as simple as, you know, the children in your own community who sometimes don't have sufficient food to eat, but they are able to eat at the school. If we don't get an accurate count, that program is going to be reduced in terms of funding, which means there's going to be less meals to go out. So that is a place that hits home very hard for everybody. We're talking about a 10-year period. Our son is 4 years old. Will there be sufficient funding in the school system so that there are up-to-date computers when my son enters middle school? That's something that the census is going to determine right now for him. 8 years, 6 years, 10 years. So we have to make that correlation and understand that you're filling out the census today in 2020 so that you can see the fruit of it for your children and for your neighbors and for the seniors. We haven't even touched on the seniors because seniors are affected by the census data too. Housing is affected by census data. And so we have to get beyond right now and next year and understand that filling out the census today, we're going to see that show up in our communities in the future, and it's going to be a rolling out. And so when your child comes home with up-to-date technology, when your child is able to have the meals, when there are sufficient teacher to student ratios, you know, when I was in school, it was about 20, 24 to 1. When my eldest children were in school, it was about 32, 33 to 1. I've heard numbers of like 40 to 1. I'm not quite sure how you get a quality education when you've got 40 children and one teacher. But again, census data is what's necessary to ensure that those numbers come down and the teacher numbers go up. So folks, just please know that it's greater than you just filling out a form or giving out information. The government is not being nosy. It's important for us to plan the next decade of your life, of your child's life, of your neighbor's life, development, hospitals, fire stations. I mean, the list is long. You can go to census.gov and it will actually show you exactly how and where monies go. Like Chris said, there's a formula of how much goes where. But if the count isn't there, you're not going to get enough anyway. One of our leads, he says all the time, the money follows the count, not the need. If that was the case, our communities would have all the money it needs. Yeah. So it's very important that we fill out that census form.
So let me shift a little bit. We've got about 12 minutes left. I'm going to come to each of you and ask you for a closing statement. But for right now, Sheriff Baird Washington, we had a question to pop up in the chat, and you know, they want to know, we've talked about, you shared some information about how our inmates, that population is counted during the census, but how is that data used to deliver the services within the institutions?
Prisons, institutions.
Yeah, take you off mute. Yep.
Because jails, all institutions like that, and any sort of federal facility, state facility, local facility, does get USDA food support. So that's how, we know that we can get extra money, or we get extra food staples from the government based on what our population looks like. Without that, we would then have to spend all of our money, which sometimes is high, sometimes is low. So it certainly helps to supplement when we can get surplus goods from USDA. That's a huge help. But I also want to go back to something that Alex said, and just to remind us that when we're talking about feeding children, you're not just talking about breakfast, lunch during the 9 months of the school year. You're talking about feeding all year long, because at Fulton Leadership Academy, where I was working for last decade, we had a summer program. So we fed kids breakfast and lunch. In fact, that summer program was open to any child in the neighborhood who wanted to come by and get something to eat. So it's not just a 9-month of Title I, monies that goes to those school children. It's for any child in the neighborhood who is food insecure, who needs to eat. And so schools provide that support throughout the entirety of a calendar year for 12 whole months. So I hope that answers the question of in terms of services that we get in correctional institutions. Because at local jails, there's really very little more that you get in terms of direct dollars from the federal government, for example. It's really more that we get the USDA support.
Got it. So, and I know Alex, you touched on what we can do to spur some traction around engaging people to participate in the census. Chris, you got any thoughts on that? Alex suggested pick 5, each 5, reach 5, I guess is what we're gonna say. But any thoughts on how we can spur some traction around how we share the information and the importance in South County? We're having a challenge in South County. I don't understand.
Well, first of all, I think definitely relationship is the key. And that's what Alex was talking about when he said pick 5 people in your phone. You're usually going to pick people that you have a relationship with, that that you have in some type of influence over. And so I really think that's one of the greatest ways to do it, is to really, the people that are in your circle, the people that you have influence over, reach out to them and make sure that they've done it. And we talk about so many things. We talk about sports, we talk about politics, religion, all kinds of stuff. We talk with our what I call our circle of influence. But we probably need to, and I'm guilty of this as well. But I'm glad that Alex brought it up, because that's a methodology that I'm going to use. I was thinking about 5 people when he said it, but it really is important that you have that conversation. It's just like when you talk with your children. Like I talk to my children about the importance of voting and why that's important to them and what that means to them. The census is the same thing. We got to be just as diligent about explaining to the people that we have influence over why this is important. And I think just breaking it down to the basic principles, that the information that's provided in the census impacts your community and quality of life that you have on so many levels that most people don't even think about. And I want to make another point. We've been talking a lot about this is how the federal government allocates money, but we also have to understand this is how the state and local municipalities and counties also allocate funding as well. They use the same data and the same formulas to allocate resources even on the local and state level. And so while most of our school system money comes from the state's using that same formula from the census information that when they allocate funding to the school system. And so it's not just when we get assistance from the federal government, the state and your county and your local governments are making the same determination based on that same census data.
So, as we come to a close, we've had a very good, almost an hour now of, chat time, sharing resources, information, strategies. I'd like for each of you to give us, like in a minute and a half, a closing statement on what the importance of completing the census is, and some strategies on next steps for our listeners. So, Sheriff Baird Washington, I'll start with you.
Well, I think all of us are here because we're saying that you cannot overemphasize the importance of being counted. there is so much data that comes out of this collection. I mean, it will come out, they will be analyzing this data for the next 10 years. And it really does get down into the micro data pieces in terms of how many doctors do we have in the neighborhood, how many dentists, how many, gyms. I mean, it will get down into just minutia, which is wonderful. And social scientists will use that data along with people who are making decisions about businesses and schools and those sorts of things. But it is critical that we support this, and it only happens once every 10 years. So it's almost like it should happen every 5 years or something, but it doesn't. It happens every 10 years, and so we really have to take advantage of this time. I think, Kathy, one of the things that bothers me is that, and I throw this really to Alex, is that there was this big push around Census Day, and so when I call my 5 people, I want to make sure that they know that it wasn't just a census day, that you can still push that information in at the website that you're providing to us. And so maybe one of the things that would help is if we had some sort of calendar that says the census data will be collected from now until this day. So people are clear that even if you missed census day, you can still get that information in, that your information is still most welcome into the data bank centrally. So again, as we are determining, what our neighborhoods are going to look like, what our schools are going to look like, what our whole quality of life is going to be like, it is so important that we are counted, that we make the impact, that people know that we are here. However we are here, whatever our truth is, whatever our income levels are, whatever is our truth just needs to be communicated correctly into the federal database.
Chris, give us your closing statement.
I'm in the future building business, and so and everybody that lives in a community, no matter who it is, Jackie just gave me her wish list item. Everyone has that one thing that they want to see come to their community. And so what I tell people all the time is that everything that you want to come to your community is based on data, demographic data. The better the data we have, the better argument we can make for bringing those fresh market things to our community, because all they look at is the data. They don't care how great of a job I do selling the community. They don't care how nice of a guy I am. They want to know, how is this going to affect their bottom line, and are they going to be able to make a profit? And they determine most of that based on data that we provide to them. Now, we can always fill in the gap with incentives and things like that, but it does not take the place of us being able to attract those type of businesses that we want in our community. And while I represent the city of South Fulton, every municipality south of I-20 has the same struggle. And so if we are not able to convey our message using data and arm ourselves with the same type of information that communities, quite frankly, on the north side are using, we're always going to be at a disadvantage. And so we need to make sure that we have all the tools that we can to be as successful as we can. And that data information that's collected from the census is a vital part of that.
Thank you. Alex, bring us home.
All right. So I always like to close with, there's an African proverb, and it says, complete the task while the tool is in hand. The tool in hand right now is the census. It's a once in a decade opportunity to bring equity to the South Side, to your community. If we do not show up on paper, we will not see the funds, right? If you're tired of driving over a pothole, if you're tired of not having the business development that you so much want in your community, if you want to ensure that your children are going to get the best education, you want to fill out the census, you want to participate. It has been extended to October 31st. That's the final day that we will be receiving information. You can go to my2020census.gov. You can call 1-844-330-2020. And it's very simple. It takes less than 10 minutes, and you will literally impact positively the next decade of the life of your household, your community, your city, your county, your side of the 20. So I say to you, I submit to you, complete the task while the tool is in hand, because it will not come back until 2030.
Well, thank you, thank you, thank you. I'd like to thank all of our guests, our panelists that have shared information and insights with us this evening. But I want to go ahead and close out on this note, because you heard it for yourself. The importance of completing the 2020 census, it's really important. It impacts our lives. It impacts our lives for the next 10 years. Alex just said it. We don't get it. We don't have this opportunity to participate in the census again until 2030. So be counted. It only takes, what, 5-7 minutes to complete the census. There are a number of different ways to complete the census. You can call a number, you can go online, or you can just mail in the form that you receive. You have until October 31st to complete the census and participate. We talked about why it's important. It helps us with healthcare, education, infrastructure, employment and training, those types of programs and goods and services that come back to our local communities and our local municipalities. So don't cheat yourself, don't cheat your community. When we fail to participate in the census, we cheat our communities. Join us on September 22nd at 6:30 p.m. for part 3 of this series, Don't Be Cheated. I'm going to turn that back over to Gloria Jenkins. She's the president of this local chapter in South Metro. Gloria, thank you for having us.
Thank you, Kathy. Do we have time for Alex to just answer one question? Give us the count for each city if you know it offhand in South Fulton.
I sure do. I actually have it right here.
Okay.
So as of yesterday, Chattahoochee Hills is 48.4%. The city of College Park is at 41.2%. The city of East Point is at 48.8%. The city of Fairburn is at 54.8%. The city of Hapeville is at 51.4%. The city of Palmetto is at 59.4%. Union City is at 49.5%. And the city of South Fulton is at 58.1%. You can find this information at census.gov. You can track this daily if you like. You can get down to your city. You can get it down to a tract, which is a community. So if you live in an area that is not getting the representation or the participation, then you know that you need to get out on your block and just start telling all your neighbors, hey, these numbers aren't working for us.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Pike, Ms. Washington, Mr. Lima. Thank you, Kathy Adams, our own member and moderator, for a very well done forum or town hall. Excellent information. We appreciate you so much for joining us and bringing this information to us. And you will be hearing from us soon, each of you, maybe for a different reason, but we got your numbers now. We'll keep up with you. Thank you and have a great evening.
Thank you, everyone.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks.